huge pool that ran almost the entire length of the northern portion of the Temple Mount. And sandwiched in the corner was likely the Antonia Fortress. That's where the Roman guards were. But here's this huge pool, and if you're going to go from about 500 Christians to 3,500 Christians, and you're going to baptize 3,000 people in one day, they probably took them to the big pool. They didn't ask, and they didn't tell. No one needed to explain it to them, and they did it without question. Second point, baptism was commanded. Now, a lot of people, they debate. You know, if we talk baptism nowadays, first thing people do is they raise their hand and say, why do I need to? Do I have to? Yeah, it's in the Bible, but do I really need to? Suffice it to say, if Peter commanded it, and by the way, every time you read it in Scripture, it is a command. If it is commanded in the Bible, don't you think you ought to do it? That's kind of a duh, isn't it? If you have not been baptized and you are a follower of Jesus Christ, the command is, be baptized. So here's the third biggie, and I just mentioned it. I left with it. It's that be. One of the things that's come up, particularly in the last 150 years, and it's a new teaching, but the new teaching is that we get in by grace alone. Well, yes, we get in by grace, but it is not grace alone. And we make a big deal about works. And yes, it is true, Scripture teaches us you cannot earn your way into heaven by doing good works. But this is not an earning. This is reciprocal. Literally, in Greek, it is you surrender to this. You be baptized. Here's our baptistry. If we open up the lid, fill it up with water, it's empty right now. I'd love for it to be filled all the time because it's necessary. But you would get in and you would sit down, and whoever is baptizing you would plunge you into the water. And by the way, that Greek word baptizo is baptizo, and it literally means to plunge, to immerse. It doesn't mean anything else. There's different Greek words for sprinkling and pouring. Oh, by the way, what they did not raise their hands for, they didn't say, oh, can I be sprinkled? Oh, can I have a cup of water poured on my head? None of them did that. Another little tidbit. For the first several hundred years of the church's life, they did not have church buildings. They met in homes. Now keep in mind, this is a time when they're persecuted. For being a Christian, you could be crucified, you could be fed to lions, there could be all kinds of things. Just to advertise that you're a Christian could be a big deal. And guess what they did, since they didn't build buildings, because they couldn't, and they were hideouts, guess what they did to solve the baptistry issue? Because by the time they're persecuted, you also could not go into the mikvahot and do it. Guess what they started doing? Private homes. And they've unearthed these. And they've got mosaics on them that show baptism and show Jesus. And, they've spent a lot of money in these private homes to put in a baptistry. So archaeology also proves that for the first several hundred years of the church's life, they never even thought that they would sprinkle or pour. That was something that was added much later. Kind of like Washington's teeth, or here's one I left out. Everything you know about the first Thanksgiving is likely untrue. Did you know that? That was invented 120 years ago. So the same thing about sprinkling and pouring. What the Bible teaches and what it taught and what the church lived for hundreds of years was baptism by immersion. So you be baptized, and it's not a work you do, but it's a work that's done unto you. For those who have a problem with that, they still struggle with that, and you can't get beyond that, then let me ask, for those of you who are married, then why the heck did you get a marriage ceremony? If ceremonies do not matter, Are you guys debating your marriage ceremony? No. So why even go through it? If ceremonies, if rituals do not matter, then why did you get married before a judge or before a priest or before a preacher? Ceremonies, rituals do matter, and they do make a difference. And by the way, that's maybe one of the best ways to think about this. This is your wedding ceremony to Jesus. So it's not only commanded, it's not only exemplified within Scripture, but it's also one of the rituals of the church. So let's get and try and wrap this up. Acts 15, the big debate. Remember, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about unity within the church. And you remember this story, Acts 15, Paul and Barnabas run into some knotheads who are saying to the Gentile believers, you've got to become more Jewish, you've got to become Jewish before you become a Christian, because you can't be a Christian unless you're Jewish first, so you have to be circumcised. And so they all head to Jerusalem, and they have this big debate. And remember how they went. This is just a synopsis. You can go back and look at the video. But basically they said, well, just don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. Don't eat, don't drink blood, or don't eat meat that's been strangled, that's got blood in it. Those sort of things. But I want to point out to you something. And all these things about becoming a Christian, they were having troubles with the Jewish equation. But do you realize what they don't talk about in Acts 15? And they don't debate? They did not debate baptism. Not once is that brought up. Not once does it say, oh, wait, what about the baptism thing too? They don't even record that. Now, for those who think, well, maybe it did become less important later on, well, you have problems. Acts chapter 16, verse 13 through 15. Do you remember a gal named Lydia? Acts 15 is the big debate. Acts 16, you get to these Gentile believers, and so what do they do with Lydia? They baptize her. Acts chapter 16, verses 27 through 34. You remember that scene? I love that one. That's one of my favorites. Here's Paul, he's in prison, and the earthquakes, and all of a sudden everybody's released, the shackles fall off, and they're singing hymns, and the Philippian jailer is about ready to run the knife through him. And remember what happens next? He preaches Jesus to him, and the Philippian jailer and his household are saved, they're baptized. Or what about Acts chapter 18, verses 5 through 8, where you have the baptism of Crispus and the others in Corinth.